A super amazing morning to you all, wherever you are in the world. I trust you are hale and healthy while keeping safe and observing the established protocols of COVID-19. I welcome you to today's lecture, which is a follow-up to the PowerPoint I uploaded on the LMS yesterday. We are still at the level of recapitulating topics that had earlier been treated before the system was collapsed as a result of the protracted ASU strike. Yesterday, I discussed with you through the PowerPoint with voice narration an overview of African ethics. Today, we shall move on to the next topic, and that is the foundation of morality in African ethics. We may want to ask the question, do we need to know the foundation of morality? And why the focus on Sophie Oluwole's perspective? A meaningful discussion of what moral values should guide social ordering in contemporary world cannot take off until we have a very sound foundation of morality. So in this light, there have been many perspectives on what constitutes the foundation of morality established in Western literature. Take for instance, some would tell you that the Greek tradition has a secular view about morality because in that tradition there is this attempt to ground morality either in human reason or on the facts of experience. In Judeo-Christian tradition, for example, moral ideals are based on the righteousness of God, or righteousness before God. However, today, neither God nor reason nor even human experience is regarded as philosophically cogent and adequate enough as basis on which to structure morality. On this note, it is therefore important to consider what is the foundation of morality within the African system. And for this purpose, we shall be discussing the view of Sophie Oluwole. However, before mentioning the view of Oluwole, I think it is important for me to let you know that when we are thinking about foundations of morality in African ethics, we have the religious foundation, which I want to believe Professor Azenabo has taken you through. We have the humanistic foundation, we have the rationalist foundation, we have the consequentialist foundation, we also have the communalist foundation. So today we are going to focus our attention on the rational basis of morality as defended by Sophie Oluwole. It is expected that at the end of this discussion, you should be able to have an appropriate understanding of the competing perspectives on the foundation of morality in African ethical discourse. I expect that at the end of this discussion as well, you should be able to understand the position of Oluwole in particular and be in a vantage position to interrogate the cogency or otherwise of our view on the role of morality in religion. And lastly, I expect that at the end of the discussion, you should have been able to come to an appreciable understanding about the intersections or the interrelationships on the interrelationships among um, the rules of behavior in Yoruba moral tradition. Having said this, the question is, what is the position of Sophie Oluwole and where can you find her position? In an article entitled The Rational Basis of Yoruba Ethical Thinking, Oluwole defended a secular yet religious quoted system of morality, using the Yoruba as an example. She holds that the Yoruba separates the secular from the religious in their moral thinking. However, one may ask the question about the limitation of such a position, and Oluwole is quite clear about such potential limitation for her. She said, given the widespread and diversity of the Yoruba, because Yoruba is not just homogeneous, that it is very easy to overgeneralize the moral beliefs of a particular section under the presumption or suggestion that they command universal consensus among the Yoruba as a whole. So, bearing that in mind, she decided to distill a foundation upon which to base morality in Yoruba thought, regardless of such limitation. And in doing so, she provided an analysis of the act of reporting, or what you might call whistleblowing. Oluwole hermeneutically analyzed what she called the tripartite bearers of a people's thought. And in this sense, by tripartite bearers of a people's thought, she has in mind maxims, proverbs, and the ideals of the education system in Yoruba society, or what you might want to call the folklores. When we talk about maxims, given that the Yoruba people do not have written moral laws, moral norms are expressed in form of maxims amongst them. And when we talk about maxims, one can identify some proverbs, folk tales, and maxims in general, speaking to the impermissibility of the act of reporting of some kind amongst the Yoruba people. For those of you that were present when this topic was discussed in the face-to-face class, you'll recall that I mentioned to you that Oluwole discussed or narrated two folk tales, one about the toothless queen and the other one about the adulterous queen. And she gave us two maxims that have to do with the act of reporting amongst the Yoruba. One says that Bi Ojubari Enu Adake. For the purpose of translation, that means let the eye see, but keep the mouth shut. So in other words, not all that you see, that you say. The second one has to do with Olofofo gbo kò gba ẹ̀gbá, ibi ọpẹ́ ló mọ. The talebearer hence nothing but thanks. In the light of these two maxims, you may want to ask, When are we permitted to tell what our eyes see? When are we allowed morally, when will it be morally right for a moral agent to report or to whistleblow? Now, there is a tendency to think that in Yoruba culture, being a witness against a fellow creature, whether of truthful or untruthful kind, is frowned at. Oluwole made us realize in an article that in determining the moral rightness or wrongness of any kind of reporting, questions such as the following are quite important. One, does the reporting originate solely from a sense of responsibility to the societal interests, or does the act of reporting originate from purely from the ground of hatred or ill will ground? Is one reporting in consonance with or in obedience to the norms of one society, or is that act done just as a way of being ill-bent in getting rid of a rival? So I'm not going to recount the two folk tales that she gave us. I will refer you to that article which I've circulated in your network. Now, for Oluwole, she thinks that in Yoruba thought, the act of reporting an event involving a social deviant is not considered a moral wrong, insofar as such reporting does not stem from some calculated movement towards wickedness, jealousness, greediness, amongst others. Some Yoruba words depicting moral vices include Ilara, Etainu. Ilara could mean doing something out of jealousness. Etainu, doing something out of wickedness. So when you report an act out of those motivations, your action will be deemed morally wrong. So in Yoruba morality, the point is that the intention or motive of the moral agent is important in the moral evaluation of the act of reporting. To the extent that this is true, one can also say that motive alone cannot provide the only basis of a moral condemnation of an act. So for Oluwole, she pointed out the religious dimension of moral judgment among the Yoruba. She noted that a wrong moral deed brings evil only when people know of it. And she cited some examples. For instance, the man that killed a vulture and went around the town boasting about it, making so much noise about it, knowing fully well that it is a taboo among the people to eat vulture. And compare that with another man who did so in silence and having no repercussion in that regard. So for Oluwole, in light of that example, she tried to show that there is something called divine punishment. However, divine punishment of a moral deviant depends on if there is human knowledge about the offense that the moral agent had committed. So Oluwole argues that there is a semblance of golden rule principle in Yoruba thought, which can be used in evaluating the act of reporting. Recall that Professor Azenabo has taught you the golden rule principle, and I also mentioned it in my first PowerPoint circulated in your network. You may want to find a semblance of the golden rule principle amongst the Yoruba, especially in their popular sayings. There is a proverb that says, "Bí a bá bẹ́gi nígbó, a fi ọ̀ràn ara ẹni wò." What does that mean? It's saying that when one acts, one should hypothetically situate oneself in the position of the receiver of the action. Okay? This golden rule principle can also be found in the works of Professor Bolaji Idowu, who said that a central all-governing norms of the Yoruba society is the golden rule principle. Having said that, the question is, how do we distinguish between an honest reporter and someone who reports for morally unjustifiable motives, say for instance hatred? Oluwole's argument is that since we human beings, we have no direct access to the motives of other moral agents, what goes on in other person's mind, you don't know. So because of that, and having accepted motive as an essential component of moral evaluation, Oluwole thinks that the Yoruba come to the conclusion that, okay, there is a need for them to employ theoretical entities. So they brought in theoretical entities to ensure justice and to ensure that appropriate social sanctions are in place. So when we say theoretical entities, I mean here gods. These gods are brought into play. They are brought into moral matters because they are believed to have the capabilities necessary in sanctioning morality. The assumption here is that the gods, they have the role of a final arbiter in moral matters, especially where human efforts are to no avail. So the point we are trying to make here is that for the Yoruba, there is the element of religion in their moral thinking. However, Oluwole is saying that we should not confuse two things here. Having elements of religion in moral considerations and basing morality on religion. She said they are two different things. So, the Yoruba man does not despise secular ethics as an irrational endeavor. Neither does he even regard any moral law as absolute. Hence, we do not even have moral laws as such. What we have are moral maxims. Unlike in the Kantian sense, where moral laws are taken as absolute. So, what the Yoruba people take is that they tend to push moral reasoning to the end of a rational process. So, they take morality as a rational endeavor. However, when they have exhausted the reasoning process, then they push it to the realm of religion. For instance, if in the process of investigating a crime, you have tried all possible empirical means to uncover the root of a crime, the suspects in crime, and all to no avail. It is common amongst the Yoruba that they will just resort to statements such as Ọlọ́run á dá, ojú Ọlọ́run tó, or even in contexts where justice has been dispensed but unsatisfactory to the people involved, they may resort to such statements as Ọlọ́run á dá, ojú Ọlọ́run á tó, meaning that God will dispense justice, or that the eyes of God see it all. So Oluwole pointed out what many defenders of a religious foundation of morality in African culture fail to point out when they declare or claim that African morality is overwhelmingly religious. For her, we need to make a distinction between basing morality on religion on the one hand and accepting a religious element within a moral scheme. So for her, she is in support of the latter and not the former. That is, accepting a religious element within a moral scheme. For her, the gods sanction moral norms, not because those moral norms in themselves are divine. Stealing, for instance, in Yoruba is essentially wrong, not because Ogun, the god of Ogun, or the goddess of Oya say so or approve so. The Yoruba gods are rational beings. And this point may not be far-fetched when we take a look at the nature of becoming, or the process of becoming a god or a goddess amongst the Yoruba. You know, there is this distinction between primordial beings and deified beings. But I'm not going to that discussion. So for Sophie Oluwole, the primary concern of an average Yoruba in moral matters is to provide a rational solution to the problem of moral sanctioning when the effort of human beings have come to a cul-de-sac, a dead end, have come to a knot. So for the Yoruba, the gods are agents of moral sanctions rather than authorities whose moral prescriptions man must obey. So in this sense, we might want to recall that I made mention of the Utaifro dilemma while we were discussing this topic prior to the lockdown, and I encourage us to compare the Utaifro dilemma in ancient Greek moral thought with what Oluwole is saying here. So Oluwole contends that while the invitation or the involvement of the gods in Yoruba moral system is indisputably religious, such is not an enough justification for regarding such moral system as irrational. Though Yoruba morality or morality in Yoruba culture is not to be understood as a philosophical system in the sense of having an intellectual conversation around formulated, absolute, and universally valid moral principles. No. Rather, the Yoruba ethical system is more of a social institution that incorporates formulated ideals that men are meant to live by. And in that institution, You also have the religious elements as mechanism for sanctioning morality and not for decreeing what those moral codes are. Those moral codes are in themselves determined and articulated by humans. So to regard Yoruba moral norms as having divine origin is to make a mistake of lumping all rules of behavior into one category and labeling them as taboos. So for Oluwole, we should avoid such temptation. And in this light, she identified three interrelated rules of behavior in Yoruba thought. One is the what you call rules of etiquette. The second is taboo, and the third is moral norms. I can recall that recently Professor Azenabo gave you an assignment on possible distinction between customs and morality. That is a very instructive assignment, which I want to believe some of you must have started working on that. I want to urge you that while working on that assignment, also think along this division that Oluwole made, okay, among these three interrelated rules of behavior in Yoruba thought. As you do that, I also urge you to think about questions such as you identifying maybe 2 or 3 or more the roles of religion in African ethics as articulated by Sophie Oluwole. Also think along the line of the 3 types of rules of behavior in Yoruba moral tradition. You might also acquaint yourself with the 2 folk tales, looking at the similarity and dissimilarities among those 2 folk tales and the morale of that folk tale. Is it morally wrong for one to report? Under what condition can one say that whistleblowing is ultimately morally justified? Thank you for listening to this lesson. I do hope that it will have served as a good background to revisiting the interface lectures that we had. And I also hope that you are taking your studies seriously as the exams dates are fast approaching. I want to urge you to look forward to the next lecture that we are going to have, which is also going to be a recapitulation of what we had earlier done on the consequentialist foundation of morality. A follow-up to that lecture will be the one on the ontologized ethical principle. Okay, I'm not sure I'm going to revise with you the Afro communal relational principle, which we used about 2 or 3 weeks to discuss before we went on the lockdown. However, please take your studies seriously. I wish you great luck. Bye.